On many occasions in the past, we expressed our utter shock and dismay at the lives lost at Sandy Hook Elementary School. How shall we ever forget the day when the most vulnerable and promising among us were slain by a madman? How is it that among us could sprout forth such evil? Is it not our duty as a nation to see where we have failed and remedy that which has contributed to this tragedy, especially since Sandy Hook was preceded by too many other similar massacres? Government, no doubt, will have proposals, and we ought to consider them rationally. The people have a duty to look at what needs to be done too. Let's use the words of those whom we put in positions to keep us safe, to discern whether that would prevent future tragedies like this. But the resolve to fix this must come from those who suffer the consequences. It is us who have to face the evil of madmen in our places of education, of worship, of commerce. This presentation of about 30 minutes briefly looks at the proposals offered by the government. And then a solution is offered, which I believe will eliminate the problem, except those under the most unusual circumstances. Let's listen to a statement by Vice President Biden.
No one can know for certain if this senseless act could have been prevented.
That's not true. Any rational person knows with a very high degree of certainty that this senseless act could have been prevented, Mr. Vice President.
I have never seen the nation's conscience so shaken by what happened at Sandy Hook. The world has changed, and it's demanding action.
Indeed, the world has changed, and it does demand action. I'm afraid that there is just no credible evidence that the administration's proposed actions will prevent future massacres like this, nor will it save lives. And here is why. Let's listen to the contradictory statements of the objective made by the President and the Vice President.
This is our first task as a society, keeping our children safe.
I'd rephrase that. It's the President's sworn duty to keep Americans safe. So to shift the obligation to society is an abdication of that responsibility. Nevertheless, the objective is clear: keeping our children safe first and foremost. Now let's listen to the objective in the words of the Vice President.
In our power to diminish the prospect that something like this could happen again.
Did you spot the contradiction? The President says our first task is keeping our children safe. This objective demands that the very first child killed is just as important as the last one killed. Nobody can disagree with that objective. The Vice President, on the other hand, says that we should only strive to diminish the prospect of more killings. This objective is perfectly happy to accept that a substantial number of children would be killed as long as we are able to diminish the total number of killings. Now stay with me on this, folks. You will see in a moment that is the administration's stated objective. Listen to the mindset of the President's reasoning.
If there is even one thing we can do to reduce this violence, if there's even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try.
That doesn't sound like there is a plan or a clear understanding how to achieve the desired outcome. From the evidence that we shall show you, it appears as if this administration is pursuing legislation with a built-in tolerance for the massacre of children, just as long as it is not too many.
Congress should restore a ban on military-style assault weapons and a 10-round limit for magazines.
Let's assume that the mass murderer acquired a magazine that holds 10 rounds, so he would be in perfect compliance with this law as proposed. It is this proposal that grants and sponsors the murderer to kill 10 children before he would be in violation of the law. That's insane. Another proposal that boggles the mind.
We will make it easier to keep guns out of the hands of criminals by strengthening the background check system.
No background check system would have picked up Seung Hui Cho, responsible for the Virginia Tech massacre. Federal privacy laws prevented Virginia Tech from being informed about Cho's mental illness. Jared Loughner would also have passed a background check. He killed 6 people, a federal judge, a 9-year-old girl, and critically wounded Representative Gabrielle Giffords. James Holmes, he would not have been picked up, even though he was under psychiatric care at the University of Colorado, no less. He even confessed to his psychiatrist that he fantasized about committing massacres. We can only assume that Adam Lanza was also mentally ill, because his mother reportedly tried to have him committed. He too would have passed a background check. None of these characters had criminal backgrounds, while strict privacy laws prevented their mental conditions from being shared with others. They would have been able to acquire as many weapons as these new proposed laws prescribe, and it wouldn't have changed the outcome. Except perhaps in Aurora, Colorado, where Holmes could have killed only 8 people instead of 12, and injuring, say, 30 people instead of 58, if these laws were able to prevent him from purchasing his semi-automatic rifle. In the light of these proposals by the administration, these massacres would all have occurred while in compliance with the proposed laws. That's insane. Relying on background checks as a means of making it easier to keep guns out of the hands of criminals is an exercise in futility. Another weird proposal.
We should get tougher on people who buy guns with the express purpose of turning around and selling them to criminals. And we should severely punish anybody who helps them do this.
Mr. President, why don't you take the lead on this and do exactly what you proposed here to the fast and furious architects and operators? If you do that, perhaps we will be inclined to believe that you are serious about this matter. Just before I explain the only real solution that will solve this problem, I'd like you to listen to the next clip of about 90 seconds. It will reveal the misconceptions about this country held by this administration. It is these misconceptions that are at the very root of these proposals. There is no way in which anyone who holds to these misconceptions could possibly reach the real solution to gun violence. I'll make my comments in the clip.
This is the land of the free, and it always will be. As Americans, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights that no man or government can take away from us.
We will show that these proposals are exactly what this government is trying to do: take away our rights.
But we've also long recognized, as our founders recognized, that with rights come responsibilities. Along with our freedom to live our lives as we will comes an obligation to allow others to do the same.
The obligation to allow others to do the same rests on government, not the people. The President appears to rebuke the people for not allowing others to do the same, while government is constraining the liberty of the people to defend themselves.
We don't live in isolation. We live in a society, a government of and by and for the people. We are responsible for each other.
This misconception is designed to force a group identity onto the people, which is diametrically opposed to the foundation of individual liberty. Individual liberty causes Americans to flock together because we have a common desire to be here. We have common goals and common interests, not because our society binds us together. Our society, quote unquote, is only the fruit of the roots and branches of our individual liberty. Society can never be the cause of our nation's coherence, because that will presuppose something other than our individual liberty that binds us together, and that breaches the wall that retains tyranny. The same thing is evident when fans go to sports events. They are not going primarily because other fans would be there. They go to see their teams play. The common bond and responsibility fans have for one another in the stadium is personal. It's not regulated by a society. We are responsible for each other only because of our personal, individual compassion for other people, which is our very essence as a nation. If the society is the origin of our responsibility towards others, it presupposes that society has a leader who rewards and punishes the members of society. That leader must be sovereign. In the United States, this is the kind of language that rekindles the history of bondage under the yoke of a king.
It is a self-evident truth that if the president can pick and choose which laws to enforce and which to permit to be violated, if he can decide which parts of the Constitution to follow and which to ignore, if he can treat the law as if he were in a cafeteria, some of this, some of that, none of the other, then we don't have the rule of law and we don't have a president, but instead we have a king.
This nation originated from the United Kingdom, in which Parliament is legislatively sovereign. In the United States, the people are sovereign, which is what a government of and by and for the people means. The main separation from the United Kingdom was the elevation of individual liberty above all other authorities, privileges, and rights. Our individual liberty is our sovereign. It is that common bond that causes we the people to exist, resulting in our society and our nation. As soon as we dethrone our sovereign, we fall into the hands of men who believe they are entitled to rule over us. To achieve that, they must first cause us to believe that we are victims of some crime, even if the overlords have to manufacture one. Once an emotional upheaval occurs, such as Sandy Hook, it becomes an opportunity to corral the victims into a society with an overlord extending them his protection. This society concept is not only foreign to this nation, it is a fatal injection of cancerous shackles. Shackles which were thrown off at great sacrifice during the Revolution. Listen to the skill with which victims of crime are cast as victims of the Constitution.
That right was denied shoppers in Clackamas, Oregon, and moviegoers in Aurora, Colorado. That most fundamental set of rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, fundamental rights that were denied to college students at Virginia Tech and high school students at Columbine and elementary school students in Newtown and kids on street corners in Chicago on too frequent a basis to tolerate it. And all the families who've never imagined that they'd lose a loved one to a bullet. Those rights are at stake.
Those fundamental rights are at stake at the hands of the government, not the people. Those of us outside of this net cast by this administration are enticed to let guilt cause us to look away from our individual liberties by suggesting that somehow we denied these victims their rights and are therefore responsible for the massacres executed by madmen. If only we would stop clinging to our silly principles, these people wouldn't have been killed, while it is by the design of government that these victims were denied their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Remember, it is government that did not hesitate for a moment to violate our rights by deliberately putting military-style assault weapons in the hands of drug cartels in Mexico with the express purpose to kill so many innocent people that it would give them the emotional upheaval they need to cast us into a deep sense of guilt over our right to bear arms. Their effort in Mexico, called Fast and Furious, failed. But they consider Sandy Hook as a gift to them, as the crisis they couldn't allow to go to waste.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And this crisis provides the opportunity for us, as I would say, the opportunity to do things that you could not do before.
And the president says,
We're responsible.
we, the people, are not responsible. You, the government, are. This nation is fully aware that throughout history, gun control preceded the massacre of millions of people by their own governments, such as the Soviet Union, Germany, Turkey, China, Guatemala, Uganda, and Cambodia.
There will be pundits and politicians and special interest lobbyists publicly warning of a tyrannical, all-out assault on liberty. Not because that's true.
The evidence shows otherwise. What the president suggests has never worked, so don't be surprised if the people are suspicious.
But because they want to gin up fear or higher ratings or revenue for themselves.
Not all who resist this tyrannical all-out assault on liberty do it to gin up fear or to garner support. The majority of us understand quite well what is happening here. After this overt attempt to impose so much guilt upon the people that they would be willing to surrender their Second Amendment rights, we, the people, cannot help but believe that these attempts at gun control are indeed a tyrannical grab at our individual liberties and a prelude to the horrific. The solution to gun violence is clear as daylight, and I will show that now. Do you remember when I said the president's objective to keep our children safe means that the killing of the first child is just as important as the killing of the last child? You thought that was rather weird? Instead of a 10-round limit on magazines, I say we should rather find ways in which a mass murderer would not be able to shoot even the very first child. So I encourage you all to adopt the mantra, save the first child. If we are able to prevent the first child from being killed, we have prevented all the killings that follow. To demonstrate the implementation of this, let's engage in a little role play. Imagine you are a teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School. You are busy working with your class of first graders. The door opens and a man walks in. He asks you if you are so-and-so. You answer yes. Without further warning, the guy pulls out a handgun, aims it at the kids, and by his body language, you immediately realize he is going to shoot the kids. What do you do? When I asked liberals how they would respond in this scenario, the first response was that they wouldn't have allowed Adam Anza's mother to have 6 guns. In the role play, we have now hit the pause button, so the gunman and the children are frozen in time. The gunman's weapon is in full compliance with existing and proposed law, so no gun control initiative could have prevented your first graders from dying this morning. What do you do? Then came the breathtaking admission from a liberal. I guess at that stage there is nothing anyone can do. My immediate thought was, you utter coward. The teacher, an unarmed woman who was faced with that situation, didn't have a pause button she could hit to give her time to consider her options. Instead, she didn't hesitate for a moment to throw herself at the gunman in an effort to protect the children. For her heroism, she was shot and killed. The school principal, also an unarmed woman, didn't have a pause button. She too instinctively charged the gunman while he was shooting to try to intervene and stop the killings. for her heroism, she was shot and killed. And you, who were in no danger because all you had to do was imagine yourself in this situation, immediately hit the pause button on the role play and concluded there was nothing anyone could do at that point. Not once was the safety and lives of the children an issue in your mind. Not once. And neither are the lives of the victims an issue in these proposals. If they were, the proposals would have been of the nature that would prevent the killings, even that of the first child, and not tolerate 10 rounds before the magazine is illegal. It is a shameful blot on our nation that we would not even consider giving these teachers something more than their unarmed bodies to shield the children against the attack of a madman. They didn't deserve to have someone shoot at them because they chose not to run, whether there are 10 or 100 bullets in the shooter's magazine. I firmly believe that the only practical solution that will almost completely eliminate the loss of life is if the teachers are armed and trained to offensively use their firearms. They are the only ones at the scene of the massacre before the first child is killed. No armed guard, no security system, nothing other than a weapon in the hands of the teacher can effectively save the life of the first child. If the teachers of Sandy Hook were armed, the moment the gunman produced his weapon, the teacher could have pulled her weapon and commanded the gunman to throw down his weapon. And if he refused to comply, let him be the only casualty. In the overwhelming majority of cases, the attack would have been over without a shot being fired, because these gunmen are cowards to the core. If one could somehow have paused the Sandy Hook tragedy at the moment before the first child was killed and gave any parent the opportunity to pull the trigger that would have killed the gunman, I would wager anything that every parent would have pulled the trigger and blew his brains out regardless of cost or consequence. The life of their child would have overruled all logic and reason. We owe them nothing less than that conviction. What about teachers who refuse to participate in an armed teachers program? Well, I don't know. You decide whose kids will be attending their classes. My gut tells me if a teacher is required to be competent in educating our children, part of the job description should be to also keep them safe or find another line of employment. The cry, "No more guns," is a fool's call. If every competent person carries a firearm, criminals would not commit crime against the people, because they are cowards to the core. Numerous crimes have been prevented by the mere display of a firearm.
And I was really scared. I was really scared.
Ernestine Aldana was scared, but she was also very brave. Almost 2 weeks before Christmas, when a robbery suspect entered her grocery store at the corner of Muskego and Beecher. You can see his right hand covered with his jacket sleeve as he takes a beverage from the cooler with his left. Seconds later, with his right hand, he pulls a knife on Ernestine and grabs her cash register. Instinctively, she pulls a gun from underneath the counter, and the suspect runs away.
I didn't remember what was being said. I just took a step back, I grabbed the gun, and that was it.
The wife and grandmother says she and her husband have owned the store 2.5 years and never had a problem until this. She says her son bought the gun for their protection, but never thought they would have to use it.
My son Nick, he took me out to the shooting range so I could shoot the gun, which I did, twice actually. And I won with my son Tom too. But other than that, no.
Milwaukee police released the surveillance video on YouTube, hoping someone will recognize the suspect and turn him in. Ernestine says she believes he's from the neighborhood, a guy who goes by the nickname of King. She thinks he's been in the store before. She considers herself and the suspect lucky.
I shouldn't say this, but I think I was going to shoot the gun, but he was already running away. And once his back was turned, I actually couldn't do it.
Sometimes it is necessary to actually use the firearm, but the outcome is always the same. Lives are saved.
He's coming into your screen right there. He's going to walk into basically a grocery store here, and he's going to pull out a knife and then slice that guy's throat. Oh. Okay, now he's going to come after the owner, and look at this. Is brutal. This is unbelievable. And then somebody else, that Good Samaritan, comes in to try to, I mean, look at how he's slashing with the knife. It's unbelievable. And then the owner, Osman Tutur, pulls out a gun and says, "End of this."
Wow. He had great aim.
He did, man. Usually the problem is when you, especially after you've been attacked like that, and there's somebody else nearby, it's really tough to shoot a gun like that.
Right.
None of the proposals to end gun violence would have prevented this knife-wielding murderer from killing everybody in that store that day. The only reason there was no loss of life was because the owner had a gun and used it.
The right to assemble peaceably. That right was denied shoppers in Clackamas, Oregon.
Have you ever asked yourself why only 2 people were killed and only 1 person injured when the gunman, armed with a Bushmaster AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, stopped shooting and committed suicide? Only 2 people? With a mall full of people? That's just not how mass murderers operate. They kill as many people as they can. But Nick Milai was in the mall that day. He had a concealed carry permit and drew his Glock 22 when the first shot was fired. As soon as the mass murderer saw Nick with his gun drawn, the massacre was over. How many lives did Nick save that day? Thankfully, we will never know. What the administration refuses to admit is that nobody could have saved all those lives but the good guy with a gun, without firing a shot. The gunman stole the Bushmaster. So in that respect, nobody, including the government, could have guaranteed that that gun wouldn't have ended up in his hands. And similarly, they cannot guarantee that any of the guns on the banned list would never end up in the hands of criminals.
Because while there is no law or set of laws that can prevent every senseless act of violence completely, no piece of legislation that will prevent every tragedy, every act of evil,
history and the people agree with the President here. Legislation is indeed impotent. Why is it then still being pursued? Why does the President offer more legislation? How many lives would these new proposals save?
if there's even one thing we can do to reduce this violence, if there's even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try.
Try, Mr. President? We are not dealing with experiments. We are dealing with children that are in their graves today. To prevent this, we need concrete plans and actions. We cannot afford any more of governments trying. The hurt of government trying is too much to bear. It is time for the people to say, no more trying, please. Government must step out of the way and let us protect ourselves. It is the only manner in which our children would be safe and violent criminals would be stopped, regardless of their weapons of choice.